The darkness of space suddenly lit up with flashes of bright light as 10,000 alien warships appeared out of nowhere around Earth. These weren't just any ships. They were massive Draconian battlecruisers, each one the size of a small city. The sound of their engines would have been deafening if sound could travel through space. Admiral Hayek stood on the bridge of his flagship, called the Crimson Talon. He was a tall, scary-looking reptilian creature with green, scaly skin and yellow, eyes that glowed in the dim light of his command center. His ship was covered in scars and dents from all the battles he had fought across the galaxy. Each mark told a story of another world he had conquered, another civilization he had crushed under his boot. The Admiral looked down at the beautiful blue and green planet, spinning slowly below him. Earth looked so peaceful from up here, with its white clouds swirling around like cotton candy. He had seen this same view 17 times before, 17 different worlds that had tried to resist the mighty Draconian Empire. None of them had succeeded. Commander Mina, a female Draconian, with purple scales, was sitting at the weapons control station. She laughed as she looked at her computer screens showing Earth's defenses. "Look at this, Admiral," she said, pointing at the data. "Their space stations are so small and weak, they look like children's toys compared to our battleships. This is going to be easier than taking candy from a baby." Captain Tay, another reptilian officer with dark green skin, was working at the communications desk. His clawed fingers moved quickly across the control panel as he prepared to send a message to Earth. "I'm sending them our usual surrender demand." "Now, sir," he reported. "Same message we've sent to every planet. Surrender now or be destroyed." The Draconian fleet began to spread out across space like a deadly spiderweb. The biggest ships, called dreadnoughts, were so huge they actually blocked out sunlight as they moved between Earth and the Sun. Their shadows fell across entire continents. As they got into position for attack, each ship was armed with enough weapons to destroy a small moon. Admiral Hayek smiled, showing his sharp white teeth. He had been conquering planets for over 50 years. He had seen brave warriors and cowardly leaders. He had watched civilizations beg for mercy and others fight to their last breath. But they all ended the same way, with the Draconian flag flying over their broken cities. The Admiral walked to the big window at the front of his bridge and looked out at Earth again. The planet looked so quiet and innocent, spinning there in the blackness of space. Little did he know that this blue marble would be different from all the others. This time, the hunters were about to become the hunted. Time kept ticking by, and still no answer came from Earth. 1 hour turned into 2, then 3, then 4. Admiral Hayek was getting more and more angry with each passing minute. He walked back and forth across his command bridge like a caged animal, his heavy boots making loud clicking sounds on the metal floor. His yellow eyes were glowing brighter. Now, which always happened when he was getting mad, the other Draconian officers on the bridge were starting to feel nervous. They had never seen their admiral this frustrated before. Usually, planets would either surrender immediately or at least try to negotiate. But Earth was doing something completely different. Absolutely nothing. Lieutenant Yoon, a young Draconian with bright blue scales, was sitting at the sensor station watching his computer screens very carefully. He looked up at the Admiral and said, "Maybe the humans are just too stupid to understand our message, sir. Their technology might be so old and broken that they can't even receive our signals properly." But Communications Officer Nari, who had been listening to Earth's radio waves for hours, shook her head quickly. She was a smart female Draconian with silver scales that sparkled under the bridge lights. "That's not it at all, Lieutenant," she said firmly. "I've been monitoring their radio broadcasts this whole time. They're definitely receiving our messages loud and clear. I can hear them talking about us on their news channels and military frequencies. They know we're here, and they know what we want. They're just choosing to ignore us completely." This made Admiral Hayek even angrier. He slammed his fist down on the control panel, making all the buttons light up. "How dare they ignore the mighty Draconian Empire," he roared. "No planet has ever had the nerve to simply not respond to us. They're either very brave or very stupid. What none of the Draconians knew was that something very strange was happening in their solar system. If they had better equipment, they might have noticed the weird energy waves that were coming from the dark side of Earth's moon. These energy pulses were also coming from several big asteroids floating around in space. But the Draconian sensors were too basic to pick up these signals. To them, it just looked like normal space radiation. Far below the surface of Earth's oceans, in places deeper than any human had ever explored, something incredible was starting to happen. Ancient beings that had been sleeping for hundreds of years were slowly waking up. These weren't humans. They were much older and much more powerful. They had been watching over humanity for thousands of years, like parents watching over their children. These mysterious guardians had been sleeping peacefully, letting humans grow and learn on their own. But now, with alien invaders threatening their precious Earth, they were beginning to stir. Deep underwater cities that had been dark and quiet for centuries were starting to glow with strange lights. The Guardians were waking up, and they were not happy about these uninvited guests. Something very strange happened that day in the asteroid belt between Mars and Jupiter. Captain Jin was leading 50 smaller Draconian warships on a routine scouting mission. These ships were much faster than the big dreadnoughts, designed to zip around and gather information about enemy defenses. Jin was an experienced captain who had done hundreds of these missions before. The 50 ships were flying in perfect formation through the rocky asteroid field, their sensors scanning for any hidden human bases or weapons. Everything seemed completely normal. The pilots were chatting on their radios, making jokes about how easy this conquest was going to be. Some were even betting on how quickly the humans would surrender. Then, without any warning at all, something impossible happened. All 50 ships just disappeared. Not destroyed, not blown up, not crashed into asteroids. They simply vanished into thin air as if they had never existed at all. 1 second they were there on everyone's radar screens, and the next second the screens were completely empty. Back on the flagship, Lieutenant Yoon was staring at his computer monitor in complete shock. He kept hitting the refresh button, thinking his equipment was broken. "Admiral," he called out nervously, "I've lost contact with Captain Jin's squadron. All 50 ships just disappeared from my screens." Admiral Hyuk stomped over to look at the displays himself. His reptilian face twisted into an angry scowl. "This is impossible," he growled. "Ships don't just vanish. There must be some explanation." He turned to his staff and declared loudly, "Equipment malfunction. Their radio transmitters probably broke, or maybe they got hit by some space debris. Either that, or Captain Jin is a coward who ran away from battle." But even as he said these words, Admiral Hyuk didn't really believe them. Captain Jin had been one of his best officers for over 20 years. He had never shown any signs of cowardice before. Commander Mina, determined to find out what happened, quickly organized a much larger search party. She sent 200 warships under the command of Colonel Han to the exact same coordinates, where Jin's squadron had vanished. These were bigger, stronger ships with better weapons and armor. If there was some kind of hidden enemy out there, 200 ships should be more than enough to handle it. Colonel Han was confident as he led his fleet toward the asteroid belt. "Whatever happened to Jin, we'll find out," he radioed back to the flagship. 200 ships can handle anything these primitive humans might throw at us. For the first few hours, everything went perfectly. The ships spread out across the asteroid field, their powerful scanners searching every rock and crater. The pilots reported finding nothing unusual, just ordinary space rocks floating in the darkness. Then, exactly 6 hours after they had arrived, the same impossible thing happened again. All 200 ships disappeared at exactly the same moment. Lieutenant Yoon watched in horror as every single dot vanished from his radar screen simultaneously. It was like someone had just turned off a light switch, and suddenly 250 Draconian warships had never existed. What started as a strange mystery quickly turned into a nightmare for the Draconian fleet. The disappearances weren't stopping. They were getting worse and happening faster. It was like some invisible monster was picking off their ships one by one, and nobody could see it coming. Battle Group 7 was the next to vanish. These were some of Admiral Hyuk's strongest ships, stationed near Jupiter's many moons to watch for any surprises from the outer solar system. The group had over 400 massive warships, each one armed with enough firepower to level an entire city. Their commander was Captain Park, a tough veteran who had survived battles against 3 different alien species. Captain Park had just finished his daily report to headquarters when something went terribly wrong. He was in the middle of telling his crew a joke about human technology when his voice suddenly cut off mid-sentence. Every single ship in Battle Group 7 disappeared at exactly the same instant, leaving behind nothing but empty space and confused radio static. At the same time, Captain Lee was leading a mining squadron near the edge of the solar system. These weren't even combat ships. They were just trying to gather resources from some asteroids to refuel the fleet. Lee's squadron had 30 ships filled with miners and engineers, not soldiers. They were the least threatening ships in the entire Draconian fleet. But it didn't matter. Whatever was hunting them didn't care if the ships were dangerous or harmless. Captain Lee's entire squadron blinked out of existence while they were in the middle of drilling into an asteroid. The mining equipment was still running when the ships vanished, leaving behind spinning drill bits floating alone in space. The most shocking disappearance happened right under everyone's nose. Several Draconian cruisers were orbiting high above Earth, taking pictures and scanning the planet's surface for military bases. These ships were so close to the main fleet that Admiral Hayek could actually see them through his bridge windows. As he watched, the ships simply faded away like ghosts. One moment they were there, their lights blinking in the darkness, and the next moment there was nothing, not even a flash of light or explosion. They just stopped existing. Commander Mina was frantically counting the losses on her computer. Her purple scales had turned pale with fear, and her hands were shaking so badly she could barely type. "Admiral," she said in a voice barely above a whisper, "we've now lost over 3,000 ships. That's entire battle groups, sir. Hundreds of thousands of our people are just gone." The news spread through the remaining fleet like wildfire. Captain Tay was listening to the radio chatter between the surviving ship commanders, and what he heard made his blood run cold. Tough Draconian captains who had never shown fear in battle were now crying and begging to retreat. Some were even praying to their ancient gods for protection. "Admiral," one captain radioed in panic, "whatever's out there, it's not human. Humans don't have this kind of technology. This is something else entirely." Admiral Hayek realized his mighty invasion. Fleet was being hunted by something far more dangerous than primitive humans. He quickly ordered all 7,000 surviving ships to form a tight circle around Earth, hoping that staying close together might protect them from whatever invisible enemy was picking them off. With thousands of ships vanishing into thin air, Admiral Hayek knew he had to find answers fast. He ordered every communications officer and intelligence specialist on his flagship to work around the clock, listening to every single radio signal coming from Earth. They needed to understand what they were really facing. Lieutenant Yoon had been sitting at his station for 18 hours straight. His blue scales dulled from exhaustion. His job was to intercept and translate human communications, but what he was hearing didn't make any sense. At first he thought the translation software was broken. "Admiral," he called out nervously, "I'm picking up some very strange conversations. From Earth. The humans keep talking about something they call the Deep Ones, and those who watch from below. They're not talking about their military or their government. They're talking about something else entirely." Communications Officer Nari had been working just as hard, trying to break into Earth's computer networks and historical databases. What she found made her silver scales turn almost white with fear. Her clawed fingers trembled as she pulled up file after file of information that seemed impossible to believe. "Admiral," she announced, her voice shaking with growing horror, "I've managed to decode some of their historical records and ancient texts. Sir, I don't think humans are the ones in charge of this planet. According to these files, there's something else down there, something much older and much more powerful." The bridge fell completely silent, except for the humming of computers and the distant sound of ship engines. Every Draconian officer stopped what they were doing and turned to listen. This was information that could mean the difference between life and death for all of them. Nari continued reading from her computer screen, her voice getting quieter with each word. The records talk about vast underwater cities that have existed for thousands of years. These cities are supposedly home to beings that have been watching over humanity since before humans even discovered fire. The texts call them guardians, or watchers. They've been guiding human development for thousands of years, helping them grow and learn, Lieutenant Yoon nodded in agreement. "That matches what I'm hearing on their radio transmissions, Admiral. Some humans seem to know about these beings. They talk about them with great respect, almost like they're talking about gods or angels." The most shocking discovery came when Nari accessed some of Earth's scientific databases. "Sir," she said, barely able to speak, "according to these files, these guardian beings possess technology that's thousands of years ahead of anything in the galaxy. They can manipulate matter at the atomic level. They can travel through dimensions. They can make objects exist or not exist just by thinking about it." Admiral Hayek felt his blood turn to ice water in his veins. He walked slowly over to the big tactical display that showed Earth floating peacefully in space. The beautiful blue and green planet looked so innocent and harmless from up here, but now he was beginning to understand the horrible truth. "We didn't invade a human world," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "We invaded their world. The humans aren't our enemies. They're just the pets or children of something far more dangerous than we ever imagined." The realization hit every officer on the bridge like a physical blow. They hadn't come to conquer a primitive civilization. They had accidentally attacked the protected children of ancient beings with godlike powers. The first sign that something incredible was about to happen came from Earth's oceans. All around the planet, the normally calm blue waters started bubbling and churning like boiling soup. Massive whirlpools formed in the Pacific, Atlantic, and Indian Oceans, each one miles wide and spinning faster than any hurricane ever recorded. From space, the Draconian fleet could see the ocean waters glowing with strange, beautiful lights, blues and purples and colors that didn't even have names. It looked like someone had dropped giant glow sticks into the deepest parts of the sea. Then, something absolutely mind-blowing happened. Enormous structures began rising from the ocean depths, breaking through the surface of the water like mountains being born. But these weren't mountains. They were buildings, or maybe cities, made of what looked like living crystal. Each structure was easily 10 times bigger than the largest Draconian dreadnought, sparkling and glowing with internal light. Lieutenant Yoon's jaw dropped as he watched his sensor readings. "Admiral," he stammered, "those things are massive. Our biggest ships look like toys compared to them. And they're not just floating, they're flying. They're actually lifting out of the water and moving through the air. The crystal cities were unlike anything anyone had ever seen before. Their surfaces were covered in geometric patterns that seemed to shift and change as you looked at them. They pulsed with energy that made the Draconian computers go crazy with readings they couldn't understand. These weren't just buildings. They were alive in some way. Suddenly, without any warning, something even more shocking happened. A voice began speaking directly inside the mind of every single Draconian throughout the entire fleet. It wasn't coming through their radio systems or their helmets. It was speaking directly to their thoughts, like someone whispering inside their heads. The voice was ancient beyond imagination, older than mountains, older than stars. It felt patient and wise, like a grandfather who had seen everything there was to see. But underneath that patience was something terrifying, a power so vast it made the entire Draconian Empire seem like children playing with toy soldiers. "You have disturbed our children," the voice said, and every Draconian could understand it perfectly, even though it wasn't speaking in their language. "Humanity represents our greatest achievement, a species we have carefully nurtured toward enlightenment for thousands of years. Your invasion threatens not just them, but everything we have worked to accomplish." Captain Tay was the first to collapse. The alien consciousness was so overwhelming that his mind simply couldn't handle it. He fell backward from his chair, his eyes rolled back in his head, twitching and gasping like he was having a seizure. The voice in his head was too big, too powerful for his brain to process. All across the fleet, the same thing was happening. Tough Draconian soldiers who had fought in 100 battles were dropping to their knees, clutching their heads and crying. Some were screaming, others were just staring into space with empty eyes. The Guardians' presence was filling their minds completely, showing them just how small and weak they really were. Commander Mina tried to stay standing, but her legs wouldn't obey her. She slumped against her control panel, purple scales turning, grey with shock. What are they?" she whispered. The crystal cities continued rising from the oceans, now floating in Earth's atmosphere like impossible dreams made real. The Guardians had awakened, and they were not happy about these uninvited guests threatening their precious humans. The ancient Guardians decided it was time to show the Draconians exactly what they were dealing with. They had been patient and gentle so far, but these reptilian invaders needed to understand the true scope of the power they had awakened. Admiral Hayuk was standing on his command bridge, trying to make sense of what was happening around his fleet. The massive crystal cities floating in Earth's atmosphere were beautiful, but terrifying at the same time. He had commanded fleets for decades, but nothing in his military training had prepared him for something like this. "Sir," Lieutenant Yoon called out nervously, "the energy readings from those structures are off the charts. Our computers can't even calculate how much power they're generating." Before Admiral Hayuk could respond, that same ancient voice spoke directly into his mind. Again. But this time the message was specifically for him and his flagship. "You need to understand what you face," the voice said calmly. "We will provide a demonstration. Do not be afraid. This is merely a lesson." Suddenly, something impossible happened. Admiral Hayuk felt a strange tingling sensation all over his body, like tiny electric shocks running through his scales. Then everything went completely black. But it wasn't just that the lights went out or that he closed his eyes. This was something far more terrifying. Admiral Hayuk, along with every single one of the 50,000 crew members aboard his massive flagship, simply stopped existing. They didn't die. Death would have been easier to understand. They just weren't there anymore. For exactly 60 seconds, the enormous dreadnought called the Crimson Talon floated empty in space. If anyone had looked inside, they would have found empty corridors, vacant chairs, and control panels with no one operating them. The ship was completely intact, but every living being aboard had simply vanished from reality. The other ships in the fleet watched in absolute horror as their admiral's flagship became a ghost ship floating silently among them. Captain Tay, who was on a different vessel, tried frantically to radio the flagship, but got no response at all. It was like trying to call someone who had never been born. Then, after what felt like an eternity, but was actually exactly 1 minute, everyone on the flagship suddenly existed again. Admiral Hayuk found himself standing in exactly the same spot on his bridge, but the experience of returning to existence was the most terrifying thing he had ever felt. Imagine going to sleep and then waking up, except there was no sleep in between. There was nothing at all. No dreams, no thoughts, no awareness that time was passing. Just complete and total nothingness, followed by the sudden shock of being alive again. Admiral Hayuk immediately fell to his knees, gasping and shaking uncontrollably. All around him, his crew members were screaming, crying, or just staring into space with completely blank expressions. Many of them had gone completely insane from the experience. Commander Mina was curled up in a corner, rocking back and forth and mumbling to herself. Lieutenant Yoon was sitting at his station, but his eyes were empty, like someone had erased part of his mind. Communications Officer Nari was crying hysterically, unable to stop the tears from flowing down her silver scales. The Guardian's voice spoke to them again, still calm and patient, despite what they had just done. "This was gentleness," the ancient beings explained. "We could make this cessation permanent across your entire fleet simultaneously, without any effort whatsoever. Every single one of your ships could simply stop existing forever." After the terrifying demonstration that had broken the minds of thousands of Draconian soldiers, the ancient Guardians decided it was time to end this invasion once and for all. The crystal cities floating around Earth began to pulse with brighter light, and that familiar ancient voice filled the minds of every surviving crew member in the fleet. Admiral Hayuk was still on his knees, his body shaking from the experience of not existing. Most of his crew was in even worse condition. Some were crying, others were staring at nothing, and a few had completely lost their ability to speak. The proud Draconian Empire's most powerful fleet had been reduced to a group of terrified, broken soldiers. "You have two choices," the Guardian voice announced, speaking with the patience of a teacher explaining a lesson to stubborn children. "We offer you these options not because we must, but because we believe even aggressive species can learn wisdom." The voice paused, letting the weight of the situation sink in. All around the fleet, Draconian officers were listening with growing dread. knowing that their lives hung in the balance of whatever these ancient beings decided. Your first choice is simple, the Guardians continued. Leave this star system immediately. Return to your empire and spread the word throughout your galaxy that Earth is protected by forces far beyond your comprehension. Tell them that humanity is not alone, and that any who threaten our children will face consequences they cannot imagine. Lieutenant Yoon, one of the few officers still capable of coherent thought, managed to look up at his sensor readings. "Admiral," he whispered weakly, "if we choose this option, how do we explain losing over half our fleet? How do we tell the Empire that we were defeated by beings we never even saw?" But the Guardians weren't finished explaining their offer. "Your second choice," the ancient voice said, and now there was a hint of something almost like sadness in it, "is to join the thousands of your ships that are already trapped in what you might call a dimensional fold." This revelation sent shockwaves through the remaining fleet. Captain Tay, who was barely holding onto his sanity, managed to speak into his radio. "The missing ships, they're not destroyed. They're imprisoned somewhere else entirely." The Guardians confirmed this terrible truth. The vessels that disappeared were not destroyed. They exist in a space between dimensions, where time moves differently and where their crews will remain until they learn the values that humanity is slowly embracing. Cooperation instead of conquest, peace instead of violence, understanding instead of fear. Commander Mina, who had recovered enough to stand up, looked around at what remained of their once mighty fleet. Of the original 10,000 ships, fewer than 4,000 were still operational in normal space. The rest were either gone forever or trapped in some unimaginable prison dimension. "How long would they stay there?" she asked, her voice barely audible. "Until they change," came the simple answer. "Some species learn quickly and earn their release within decades. Others require centuries. A few never learn at all." The Guardians made it clear that this wasn't really a negotiation. The Draconians had already tried using their weapons against the crystal cities, but their most powerful laser cannons and plasma torpedoes had simply passed through the structures like they were made of light. Nothing in their arsenal could even scratch these ancient beings. "Choose now," the voice commanded, and suddenly every Draconian in the fleet understood that their time for decision was running out. They could flee and spend the rest of their lives as messengers of warning, or they could join their missing comrades in dimensional exile until they learned to be better than they were. The moment of decision had arrived, and the surviving Draconian fleet was split right down the middle. Admiral Hayuk, still trembling from his experience of non-existence, made the choice that would save what remained of his career and possibly his sanity. He looked around at his broken crew and knew they couldn't endure another demonstration of the Guardian's terrifying power. "All ships," he announced over the fleet communication system, his voice hoarse and shaky, "prepare for immediate hyperspace jump. We're leaving this cursed system now." 3,000 Draconian vessels began powering up their hyperspace engines, the familiar blue glow of their propulsion systems lighting up the darkness of space. These ships were carrying crews who had been forever changed by what they had witnessed. Tough warriors who had conquered dozens of worlds were now afraid of their own shadows. Officers who had never shown fear in battle were now jumping at every strange sound. Lieutenant Yoon, his blue scales still pale from shock, managed to coordinate the retreat. "Hyperspace coordinates locked in, Admiral. All ships report ready." "For jump!" His hands were shaking so badly he could barely operate his controls. As the 3,000 ships disappeared into hyperspace, they carried with them a message that would spread throughout the entire galaxy like wildfire. These weren't just random rumors or stories told by frightened soldiers. These were official reports from Admiral Hayuk himself, one of the Empire's most respected commanders. The message was simple but terrifying. Earth was protected by beings so powerful they made the Draconian Empire look like children playing war games. Any species that dared to threaten humanity would face consequences beyond imagination. Word spread from planet to planet, from empire to empire, until every intelligent species in the galaxy knew the truth about the small blue world orbiting an ordinary yellow star. Meanwhile, the remaining 1,000 Draconian ships made a different choice. These vessels were mostly crewed by soldiers whose minds had been completely shattered by the Guardians' demonstration. Commander Mina, Captain Tay, and hundreds of other officers had been so traumatized that they could barely function as military personnel anymore. "We accept your terms," Commander Mina transmitted to the Crystal Cities, her voice barely above, a whisper. We need to learn. We need to become better than what we are." The Guardians accepted their surrender with something that almost sounded like compassion. The 1,000 ships didn't disappear like their missing comrades had. Instead, they simply faded away, becoming slightly transparent before vanishing entirely into the dimensional fold. Their crews would spend years, maybe decades, learning about cooperation, empathy, and peace in a place where time moved differently, and where their aggressive instincts could slowly be replaced with wisdom. Down on Earth's surface, life continued, exactly as it always had. People went to work, children played in parks, and families gathered for dinner around kitchen tables. Nobody on the planet knew that they had just been saved from complete destruction by beings they had never seen and protectors they didn't even know existed. The morning news didn't mention the battle that had raged in space above their heads. Social media was full of the usual complaints about traffic and weather, not discussions about interdimensional guardians and alien fleets. Humanity continued its slow journey toward becoming a better species, completely unaware that ancient watchers were helping guide every step of their progress. Deep beneath Earth's oceans, the Crystal Cities slowly sank back into the depths where they belonged. The Guardians returned to their patient watch, satisfied that their children were safe once again. They knew that someday, when humanity was ready, they would reveal themselves and welcome their greatest creation as equals among the stars. Summoning Galaxy had learned its lesson, and Earth's secret was now its greatest protection.